Here I am at the Puerta, which is one of the gates into Tijuana. This is San Isidro, one of the busiest border crossing in the world. And so since the topic that I'm going to cover is about fronterizos, these people who commute back and forth, and especially here in San Isidro, border with Tijuana, which is one of the busiest border crossings on the planet. And we're gonna talk about who crosses the border every day and who falls under that category of fronterizo or borderlanders, you name it. So our border region has a population of 90 million people and about 700,000 of them crossed from Mexico into the United States every day. This is actually from 2022. And San Diego and Tijuana is actually the largest region in terms of population, about 7 million in both sides of the border, so quite dense. So for these transborders or borderlanders, for them to cross the border, it is definitely a pain because it's heavily congested, especially during rush hour. If you've never been to a border here in the US and Mexico, you are going to learn that during rush hours it's very heavy. It's so congested that it takes people hours to come across. So the US came up with these solutions to create these programs. One of them is the Sentry line, and this program is for low risk travelers whose personal data has been checked by the US. So by having this Sentry card, you are waiting less time. And I wanted to tell you that in my case, when I didn't have it, it used to take me an hour and a half, sometimes two, and I cut it down to 20 minutes. But not anyone can get it because you also have to have an impeccable record. You cannot have any record on the police. If you committed a crime, you cannot do it. So there's some limitations. A lot of people resent that because, yes, you're sort of cutting through a long line. So in 1965, we saw exponentially growth along the US-Mexican border region. And one of the reasons why is because in 1965, the Mexican government established the Border Industrialization Program to stimulate industrialization in northern Mexico. So this program catapulted so many people from the interior of Mexico into our border. So the program resulted in the creation of maquiladoras, and these maquiladoras are assembly plants that are coming from different parts of the world, but mostly were from the US, which are low-cost factories in Mexico that are owned by foreign corporations. These plants assemble products and export them back to the US. Now, this is the beginning of the free trade agreement that we have with Mexico and also with the US. But this is one of the main reasons, and I reiterate, that was bringing so many people from many parts of Mexico, because the border now became this economic boom, attracting so many people into these assembly plants. So in my book, chapter 4, I talk about how the concept of border hybridity can cause some problems. I mentioned that one of them is political and nationalistic tensions. For example, our border region is often politically charged and closely linked to issues of national identity. And so when we hear, for example, in 2016, former President Trump saying that when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending this best, that creates some type of resentment among those who are living on the US-Mexican side. They feel that they're not wanted, and that makes sense. A factor that sent a lot of people into the border on the Mexican side, it happened during Bill Clinton when he signed the 1996 law. And so this 1996 law created a massive deportation and it still continues to happen. That's how most of these people who are sent back into their countries, or those who are sent back into Mexico, most of them who are Mexican nationals decide to stay at the border. And this is the case of most deportees that we see either in Tijuana or any other city along the border on the Mexican side. In your chapter, I also cover a group that I don't think they belong to the idea of transborder or borderlanders or fronterizos, because these are people who cannot commute back and forth. And let me give you a list. For example, those who were deported and they ended up, let's say, staying in Tijuana. And one of the reasons a lot of these people ended up staying so close to the border with the US is because most of them have family ties. So it's easier for them to stay, let's say, in Tijuana or Ciudad Juarez, because family members can come into the border, cross into Tijuana or any of those towns along the border in the Mexican side and reunite to those family members. So the other group that we have is we have a large number of deported vets. And these people also resent the fact that they were deported by the US. So think about the concept that you fought for a country that you also were willing to die for, and all of a sudden you find yourself in deportation proceedings and you ended up being sent back to Mexico. Most of these soldiers are also along the border, like Tijuana, Juarez, waiting to see if they can come back. And once again, all of them has family ties with the US. These people spend most of their life living in the US. I mentioned also in your chapter how hard it is to get a visa for a poor migrant or a poor Mexican national who wants to come and become a border commuter. And it's not easy because there's a lot of challenge. I always hear people, and I wrote this in my book, that people often say if they want to come to the US, they should come the right way. It means that they should not jump the border fence and enter the country illegally. So, however, obtaining a visa or crossing car, it is extremely hard. And I wrote down that the reason why is because the US embassy is going to ask these people to present or to prove that they have a job in Mexico. That means that they're financially stable. They're going to ask for his bank records or statements. If he owns a business, if he owns property, all this will show that he or she are not going to stay in the US, so they can get that border crossing card and they can commute back and forth only within 20 miles just to buy things in the US. Like go to the mall, go to the outlets in the Americas and buy stuff, and they will come back to Mexico. In chapter 4, I also cover those students who cross the border to come to school. And most of them are American citizens. Many of their family members are not. That is why they live in Mexico. So these transborder students, either college or young students, they face a lot of hurdles. Think about how early you have to get up to cross the border, be in class on time. It becomes a problem when someone lives in Tijuana, especially students, and they don't have an address in the US. That poses a lot of problems. That is why on Friday, October 15, 2023, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a new law that made low-income Mexican residents living near the border eligible for in-state tuition rates for some community college. The legislation applies to low-income Mexicans who live within 45 miles of the California-Mexican border and want to attend a participating community college in Southern California. It is a pilot program, and it looks like it's going to run until 2029, so those are great news for those students. So in closing, we can understand how this border region is really complex in terms of identity. Yes, there's one group that flows really well within the border region, especially those who you're going to be reading about the students who live in Tijuana, but they come to school in the US and they sort of adapt both worlds really well. But not everyone really fits into this hybrid concept. And that's why I wanted to do this summary pointing out the different reasons how this border is composed of so many different people who have either come from inner Mexico into the border, or those who have been deported, and those who are recently coming, like the Haitians who couldn't come into the US and then ended up becoming new citizens of Tijuana. I hope you enjoyed this concept. It's really complex, but it's something that a lot of people who are outsiders do not understand how border people function. Thank you.